Like many fans, I was a really big fan of Scourge from the Archie Sonic comics. He was basically an angsty, evil green version of Sonic, but somehow it just worked so well. So when a similar character appeared in IDW alongside with a little blue water fox, I was immediately intrigued. And spoiler alert, I love Surge, but not for the same reasons I loved Scourge. Ever since I made my video on Dr. Starline, I've really been dying to talk about this one. So, Surge was born from one of Dr. Starline's overly convoluted plans after he had split from Dr. Eggman. Essentially, Starline wanted to create his own replacement heroes that he could control. After getting all of the necessary components, he made his new creations, Surge and Kit. So essentially he put them on test tracks and ran a few tests to make sure that they were up to snuff. First up, we've got Surge. She's a green tenrec and she's got a heavy punk aesthetic. I'd best describe her personality as Sonic's worst traits, so like her cockiness is dialed up to 11. Surge also controls electricity, which she channels through her accessories, which is a lot of fun stuff. And I absolutely adore her design. Then there's Kitsunami, or Kit. He's that little blue fox I talked about earlier, and with the help of a special backpack, he can control water and create multiple tails. Kit seems kind of like the inverse of Tails. He's got all of his worst qualities as well that are just cranked up a little bit too high. He's incredibly insecure, and he's willing to do anything to please Surge. Now, during this test run, Surge begins bragging once she finishes it, and then Starline points out a pretty good point that she kind of left Kit behind. Surge, though, doesn't really care. She wants to get out there into the real world, and she's tired of all of these tests, tired of all of these planned scenarios by Starline. But we would learn that Starline has a way of controlling both Surge and Kit. He essentially can hypnotize them with his hypnosis glove, and he can manipulate and gaslight them by implanting false memories into them while they sleep. Once they would awake, Starline would then send Surge and Kit on their first expedition. And I love how Surge just kind of casually suggests that they should assassinate Sonic. It's just so funny that it's tossed out there. They would essentially end up stirring up some trouble in Central City, and we would get to see more of the early dynamic between Surge and Kit. Surge is really quick to dismiss Kit, and her classic line that she throws out here, "I'm a go fast," is honestly just pure gold. It's like you grabbed one of Sonic's lines and just twisted it a little bit, which might be the best way to describe Surge. Chaos, of course, ensues, and eventually they end up with Starline at Tails' weirdly head-shaped house, and Starline tries to get Kit to break into it, but they can't, so they end up making a run for it before they get caught. And once back at base, we would learn that Amy had stepped in and she saved the day. From here, Surge and Kit are then going to be sent out once again on another test for Starline, and Surge predictably gets angry again. She wants to go against Sonic, she doesn't want to keep doing this stuff. So Starline has to gaslight her into thinking that it was actually her idea to want more tests instead of focusing on these missions against Sonic. Their next test would involve an assault on one of Eggman's bases in order to gain control of his robots. We would see actually a really cool power that Kit has where he's able to create a 3D map of the base, and although I do think it's really cool, we only see it this one time and it feels like kind of underutilized or maybe even just forgotten about. So the gang begins their attack, and while Starline infiltrates the building, Surge and Kit handle the enemies outside. However, Surge ends up struggling a little bit while she's fighting this really big badnik. And in frustration, she can't help but think that Sonic wouldn't have trouble here, and that just really makes her angry. After several failed attempts to finally take down this big badnik by repeatedly crashing into its chest, Surge's overconfidence takes over. She pushes away Kit, who honestly is just trying to help here, and she ends up getting directly hit by a giant spike ball fired from the badnik, leaving her seemingly crushed. That's when we get to see the full, terrifying extent of Kit's abilities. This guy, honestly, is absolutely terrifying once he kicks it into high gear. He would end up lobbing the spike ball back at the robot with ease, and after Kit digs through the rubble, he would find Surge. And to both of their shock, she's completely fine. Not only is she unharmed, but she's even strong enough to immediately finish off that badnik that we were just talking about, and is then eager to take on a whole swarm of badniks that arrived. However, to both of their surprise, the remaining badniks start clapping for them, and it turns out that Starline had already taken over the base, and they've successfully completed this mission. Afterward, while Starline is busy keeping all the activities hush-hush from Eggman, Surge pulls Kit aside and she tells him that they are not going to mention her newfound invulnerability to Starline. Surge is starting to connect the dots. She's putting puzzle pieces together in her head, and she's realizing that a lot of her thoughts that she has aren't her own. So together they decide they're going to hack into Starline's video diaries to uncover the truth. On Starline's video diary, the duo finally sees just how broken Starline was after being rejected by his hero and idol Eggman. And after being constantly dismissed so many times, in a wild twist, Starline decides that robots, like the ones that Eggman made, aren't the answer to this chaotic world. And instead of putting animals inside of robots, like Eggman, Starline chose to instead go in the opposite direction and put robots inside of animals. So we would get this painful glimpse of Surge and Kit inside of test tubes undergoing this transformation. Essentially, Starline is trying to recreate both Sonic and Tails. Kit needs a little bit of extra support with those water packs to keep him up to snuff with Tails, and Surge, to give her that speed, requires electromagnetic propulsion. It's also interesting that their names are in quotes here when Starline talks about them. It kind of shows to us, the reader, that these identities are identities that Starline gave to them, and perhaps not even their actual names. What's even more fascinating is that we've got nothing about their past here. We've learned a little bit about how they were made, but we don't know where they came from, and even if they came from somewhere, because it's entirely possible that Starline maybe even created them in these test tubes. Now, for those of you who watched my Starline video, you might remember that he had kidnapped Belle at one point as he was trying to figure out how Mr. Tinker managed to give a robot a personality. And if you're curious, I translated the binary that shows up when he does that, and it spells out soul, which is kind of fun. But with that, Starline kind of had these two creations that could follow all of his commands as he understood how a robot can think. And he was able to completely alter their thoughts to follow his own goals. Understandably, Surge is entirely pissed off when she figures this out, and really, who could blame her? We see the extent of Starline's manipulation. He mind-controlled and altered both Surge and Kit, making Surge obsess over hating Sonic until she believed without a doubt, without even that glove being present, that that was her own thought. And meanwhile, he did something so similar to Kit, where he made him believe that his entire purpose in life should be to support Surge and nothing else. Starline's level of control is nearly as twisted as Eggman. Remember, Eggman is a very twisted and, honestly insane villain, but Starline was not far behind, and in this area, I honestly might consider him worse because I don't think we've ever seen something like that from Eggman. And this mind control wasn't without its own faults. It left scars on both Surge and Kit. Surge's angry outbursts and Kit's cowardice are direct results of trauma from the mind alteration process. Starline didn't just create cyborgs, he erased who these people were and molded them back up to who he wanted them to be. And that wasn't an easy task to do, so it did leave some cracks in the mold here. But at the end of the day, these two only exist to fulfill Starline's vision, or at least that's what he wants. So just as Surge realizes this, Starline walks in, and a teary-eyed Surge completely loses it on him. Starline would try to hypnotize her like before, but this time she's prepared. She covers her eyes, and Kit ends up ambushing him from above. Starline would electrocute Kit with his boots, because apparently they can do that, but this gives Surge just enough time to spin dash into him. Starline manages to defend himself just narrowly with his tricore, and he temporarily gains the upper hand on Surge, until he makes two big mistakes. One, he forgets how insanely fast Surge heals thanks to her augmentations, and he underestimates just how much of a chaotic little gremlin Kit is, because whenever Surge is in danger, Kit really starts to shine as an unstoppable force that's actually terrifying. So together, they manage to get Starline's glove, and Surge uses it to knock him out. The emotions in the scene are intense. Surge has this clear mixture of anger and a really deep sadness. And she declares that it's time to burn everything down. Anarchy 100% will reign, and no one, hero or villain, is safe from these two. So, Kit tells Surge that Starline already had a plan to bring down Sonic and Eggman. So if they play along using Starline's glove to manipulate him, they'll get the chance to face everyone all at once. And that's exactly what they end up doing. Starline wakes up and Surge acts like everything is normal, talking about mission prep and all that. Meanwhile, Surge and Kit, behind the scenes, are putting their plan into motion. Sure, they're gonna act like they're still Starline's perfect pets, but they're here plotting his destruction from the inside. With that, the trio ends up heading out to launch an attack on Eggman. And what's really cool here is that we see some real growth between Surge and Kit. No more is she so dismissive and rude towards him. Together, they work to destroy this giant version of Grounder. The two even get to face off against Metal Sonic, which has Surge particularly excited because this is the closest she's ever gotten to fighting Sonic up until now. But Surge realizes really quickly that Metal is out of her league. Metal Sonic throws her aside effortlessly, and they even end up referencing the Sonic OVA during this clash, which I am a total sucker for, honestly. Surge continues to take a beating, but once again, everyone forgets about Kit. our favorite blue fox ends up coming through and he traps Metal Sonic inside of a water sphere. In one of my favorite Sonic panels ever, Surge just snaps her fingers and fries Metal Sonic, quoting Shadow from Sonic Adventure 2 as she does it, which, oh my god, that's just the cherry on top. It's honestly just another reason why Surge has solidified herself as my favorite character from IDW right now. Meanwhile, Starline starts to take over. Eggman ends up fleeing, and he ends up in a secret mech room where he preps for round 2 against Starline. And all the while, Sonic rushes over to join in the battle along with his friends. I have to say, just really quick, one thing that I really like about Surge here is that she isn't the perfect villain. She has a really hard time coming to grasps with what exactly she should do, and on top of that, when fighting Metal Sonic, she doesn't just immediately destroy him and push him to the side. She struggles against him, and it's kind of cool to see that happen. It's kind of cool to see a character who has all these faults in her. Now, if you're curious about the mech fight between Starline and Eggman, you can check that out in my Starline video, but for now, we're going to be focusing on the opposite end of what was happening on the ground. It doesn't take long for Kit to engage with Tails, and in one of the most terrifying scenes ever, Kit explains just how long it takes to drown someone, which you never do unless you're planning something kind of malicious. Meanwhile, Surge finally gets her chance to face one-on-one against Sonic. This is the moment that she has been waiting for. She's had memories of hatred towards Sonic implanted inside of her, and now she can finally unleash all of that untapped rage against him. Even if it's not deserved against Sonic, she blames Sonic for everything. He's had chances time and time again to take down both Dr. Eggman and Starline, but he never has. He's always tried to take an alternative route with them, and had he not done that, Surge wouldn't be here. Surge would have never been turned into this, and she may have been still living a normal life. So this is where Surge is different. She's decided she's going to end all of them, starting with Sonic, because, like I said, she holds him responsible for her very existence currently. And honestly, she looks so incredibly cool while delivering that speech. Sonic, on the other hand, is pretty casual about all of this. He tries introducing himself, and Surge just completely shuts him down with one of my favorite lines in the Sonic comics. After introducing herself, she tells him that his speed of sound can't compete with her speed of light, which, is such a great line to deliver. While Surge and Sonic battle it out, Tails tries to compliment Kid on his equipment and skills, and it throws Kid a little bit off, but at the end of the day, he's having none of it. Tails keeps pushing though, and he almost manages to talk Kid down. After he flies over to him, Tails learns about what Starline had done to him, and when he asks if Starline hurt him, Kit absolutely snaps. Icicle spears fly everywhere as Kit screams about his hatred for Starline. It's such a powerful moment that, honestly got me a little bit teary-eyed. Tails almost gets through to him, but the second he mentions finding Sonic, Kit shuts down again. He is determined to give Surge her chance to destroy Sonic, and nothing is going to prevent that. As for Sonic, he's actually really enjoying this fight with Surge, which only makes her angrier. Like Tails, Sonic does try to talk her down, telling her that she can have a do-over and that he's willing to offer to her what he's willing to offer to anyone, even Starline and Eggman. But this enrages Surge, because in her eyes, there are only two options about how she got here. Either she willingly joined Starline, meaning that her life was already falling apart or that she was already quite evil to begin with, or she was kidnapped, but nobody ever came to find her. So at the end of the day, did anybody really even care about her? Either way, she feels like the world has rejected her, and so then why should she come back to it? The fights continue, and Eggman ends up defeating Starline during all of this. Tails also manages to disable Kit's water pack, and Surge ends up being knocked over a massive pit. Sonic, seeing her on the ropes, just barely hanging in there, offers her his hand, but Surge ends up shocking him instead, and she's so satisfied and smug with getting the last hit, she just lets go and falls. Sonic assumes that she's gone for good because how could anyone survive a fall like that? There's unfortunately no time to check to confirm it, as everything around them is collapsing. So Sonic rushes to find Tails, who has an unconscious Kit, and they quickly share their experience. But there's really no time to reflect on any of this, as Eggman has regained control, and they need to deal with that now. While Sonic and his friends are busy escaping from Eggman's forces, including Metal Sonic, Surge regains consciousness at the bottom of the pit where she fell. To her surprise, she's completely unscathed. As she collects herself, she spots Starline's glove nearby and is really uninterested in it. She ends up holding it up in front of her, and she just decides she doesn't want anything to do with him and that honestly he's better off dead. She tosses the glove into a nearby incinerator and is determined to rid herself of all of his influence once and for all. Surge then navigates her way towards a trash chute, and while climbing up it, she eventually finds Cubot and holds him hostage in order to get him to guide her through Eggman's base. After quickly checking out a gun and examining her surroundings, she decides that the Pew Pew should be left to Shadow, and instead she stumbles upon an item known as the Dynamo Cage. It's a device that's capable of harnessing energy from pretty much anything, and what's even more important than that is that the Dynamo Cage can be charged by Surge's own electric powers. So Surge takes this opportunity, and she begins her own assault against Eggman. She uses this Dynamo Cage to amplify her already really terrifying electric abilities, and it marks the beginning of her solo career against just about everyone without Starline in the picture at all. I really enjoy watching Surge go toe-to-toe with Eggman. Up until now, most new villains have either worked with or for Eggman, so seeing someone who, like, off the bat is just so determined to take him down from the start is really refreshing. The art here is honestly just absolutely phenomenal too. I don't want to constantly stop and talk about the art, but like throughout the entire run here, IDW has really outdone themselves because this is just so visually pleasing to look at. But I really like specifically here the dark shadows that just add so much intensity everywhere. Now, thanks to the Dynamo Cage, Surge is able to absorb a crazy amount of gunfire, which only makes her stronger. We would even get to see genuine fear from Eggman, something that's honestly pretty rare to come from him. Because unlike when he faced Starline, he is not prepared for Surge. He was not anticipating this at all, and he doesn't have a contingency plan for it. Luckily for Eggman, he's got some serious plot armor, like on the same level as Sonic, and so Surge, instead of finishing him off, declares that she'll be back after she takes out Sonic. But we would end up seeing Surge's damaged mental state as Starline continues to appear in her mind, and he's just constantly berating her while she tries to hunt down Sonic. Meanwhile, Kid is actually doing a lot better. He's sort of shifted his focus towards Sonic, he's helping take care of him, and Starline's conditioning is still pretty apparent as it seems like he needs somebody to look up to and somebody to be like the sidekick to. He's still just so subservient. Even when Sonic tells him to relax, he has a pretty hard time with that. And we would learn while Kid is gone putting away some medical supplies that he had not heard the news of what had happened to Surge. Once he returns from putting away the medical supplies, Sonic has a one-on-one conversation with him, explaining that despite his best efforts, he doesn't think Surge survived their fight. Of course, we know that isn't true. Surge is very much alive and currently terrorizing a nearby city with her supercharged abilities while searching for Sonic. During her rampage, she catches the attention of Whisper and her Wisps, leading to a really fun fight against two of my favorite new IDW characters. After getting shot, Surge realizes that the Wisps can even overcharge her powers and she can kind of capture them inside of the Dynamo Cage. So she rushes Whisper and steals her pink Wisp. This grants Surge an instant boost in power, which really upsets Whisper. Eventually, Whisper loses another Wisp to Surge, and it's at this point that Sonic ends up hearing about this. He heads out to deal with her, but by the time he arrives, Surge has already acquired even more Wisps, making her even more powerful. The fight scene that follows is really great, especially when Whisper uses a shard of her own Wispin as a weapon to try and shiv Surge. It's such an amazing dynamic moment, and they've done a really good job drawing this fight scene out. Luckily for Whisper, imaginary Starline appears again and briefly distracts Surge, but before things get worse, Sonic arrives just in the nick of time to try and defuse things. Everything, however, gets a lot more intense. Sonic and Surge immediately start fighting, and Whisper is just devastated over losing her Wisps because honestly, these are more like family to her than anything else. And things only get more and more heated because Kit ends up seeing Sonic on TV, and he decides in his broken state that he's got to protect Sonic at all costs because he's already lost Surge and he can't lose another leader. However, he hasn't realized who Sonic is fighting, so he tries to leave, Bell tries to stop him, and Kit goes full terrifying octopus mode as he just heads on out. Meanwhile, Surge is fighting both Sonic and Tails at once, and it's a real testament to her abilities. Like, yes, Sonic is still a little bit injured from that scuffle he had with Eggman while trying to escape, but it really shows that she can really hold her own and then some thanks to the extra power of the Dynamo Cage. So with these new Wisp powers, she eventually takes out Tails, and at one point, Sonic gains temporary control over the Cyan Wisps, which kind of helps. However, it doesn't take long for Surge to absorb that ability as well. So I'm not really sure why Whisper thought that was a good idea when she had already seen that Surge could just easily suck up all of her previous Wisps. Sonic and Tails realize that they're going to need to outsmart her somehow, so they lure her inside of a hardware store. And honestly, Surge is really cool in this fight, especially with the crazy laser eyes that she ends up having thanks to the Wisp powers as she hunts down Sonic. Eventually, Sonic leads her into a room where Tails has jerry-rigged a bunch of electronic appliances together, and with some jumper cables, they end up hooking Surge up to all the equipment, and they use it to drain her power, which is honestly kind of a really fun idea. And for a moment, it seems like Surge might power through it. She even looks like she might be unstoppable, but it becomes clear right here that she is fried. So victory for Sonic and Tails, right? They won, even though Sonic is injured. At the end of the day, they've got Surge down, and so all they have to do is get the equipment off of her and they can rescue those wisps, right? But yeah, Kid ends up arriving here, and when he sees Surge all beaten up by Sonic and Tails, he completely loses it. It's pretty understandable, considering that he was told that Surge was dead, and now he sees that she's been beat up by his new best friends. So seeing her like this, Kid ends up taking Surge out of the wreckage, and the duo escapes to fight another day. Surge would eventually wake back up in an all too familiar Sigma base where Starline had originally set up shop way back when, and it's where she and Kit ended up living for a good deal of their lives that they can at least remember up until now. She continues to deal with these Starline hallucinations, and there's this really touching and sweet moment where she's backed into the corner, she's got tears in her eyes, and she's just being berated by the images of this dead platypus. Kit ends up coming in and just gives her a hug and pulls her out of this breakdown, and it really solidifies this bond that they have. Sure, they're now friends and they're great fighters, but all of this was forged by a shared trauma, which is honestly a little bit tragic. Despite clearly needing this moment, Surge quickly reverts to her old tough persona and tries to push Kit away from the hug, which honestly just really shows off her character some more, and I really enjoy it. Surge and Kit would then later on lead both Sonic and Eggman into the abandoned base, and once inside, Metal Sonic would end up capturing Sonic, prompting Eggman to temporarily join up with Tails as they navigate through the facility. After losing Tails, Eggman begins to try to track the dynamo cage and ends up discovering to his shock that the cage is right above him. In a wild scene, he ends up just pulling out a gun and fires at Surge. It's not the first time we've seen him with a weapon, but honestly, it's always so intense whenever I just see him holding what looks like a normal gun. I really enjoy the ensuing fight between Eggman and Surge. Eggman brings an impressive amount of firepower with him, and you're reminded that this guy's a genuine threat. He doesn't always have to rely on sending fleets of robots to go fight for him. He can go toe to toe. He's got the brains, and with those brains, he's been able to build mechanical brawn. At one point, he even attempts to cook Surge using his Eggwalker's thrusters, which is honestly just brutal and such a terrifying way to go. If it wasn't for Surge's wisp laser eyes, it honestly might have taken her out, and it would have made this video a heck of a lot shorter, but Surge of course manages to knock him out of his walker, and she takes that opportunity to absorb the power of the Chaos Drive that gives the walker its power. Eggman tries to use some old access codes to escape through a hatch like he had before when he was dealing with Starline, but he underestimates Starline, who had actually disabled them in this base. This leaves Eggman trapped with an angry tenrec, and if not for Metal swooping in, Eggman would have been completely fried, or something else regarding his plot armor would have saved him. Unfortunately for Surge, she would find herself outnumbered as Sonic joins in and just kinda kicks her in the butt. This moment really adds depth to Surge's character, because up until now we've seen somebody who just fights no matter what and is just angry and fueled by this need for some kind of vengeance. However, she ends up fleeing here. She runs into the shadows and she's experiencing panic, to the point where it looks like she's having a panic attack. Her trauma motivates her, but it's also holding her back. She constantly feels inadequate, and I think this is something that a lot of readers can relate to. I know that I personally can. And thankfully, Kid is there to end up snapping her out of it, because otherwise, she would have had a full breakdown here. Even though this video is focusing on Surge and Kit, let's just take a quick little deviation to discuss what's going on at this moment with Sonic, Tails, Eggman, and Metal, because it is a little bit relevant to our duo here. The group would end up employing the classic enemy of my enemy is my friend strategy and temporarily team up, which is honestly something I always enjoy seeing and something that we're going to see one more time in this video between all these characters again. It's especially charming when Eggman is still giving threats like, "I'll absolutely crush you, eventually." It's fun, I like it. With no other option, the gang ventures forwards and they discover a room that's filled with vats, similar to the ones that we had previously seen Surge and Kid inside when Starline transformed them. There's also notes all over the place, and Eggman starts to kind of flip through these. It's really fascinating while this happens because Eggman admits that Starline had one of the most remarkable minds that he have ever encountered. However, he makes it clear that this is not praise. Defeating Starline only proves one thing, and that's that Eggman's mind is superior to Starline's mind. So even if he says that Starline has a remarkable mind, it's really just self-praise because that means that Eggman's mind is even more remarkable. This room would eventually lead into a silo, and it sets the stage for an epic 2 versus 4 showdown, which is complete with some of the coolest full-page art that honestly I've ever seen. I really like looking at this giant fight scene that just takes up an entire page. This fight is absolutely wild, and it might just rank as one of my favorite all-time fights from any Sonic comic, IDW or Archie. Watching Surge, Metal Sonic, and Sonic clash and inflict real damage on each other is really well executed. Eventually, the silo begins to flood, and surprisingly at this point, Eggman ends up saving Sonic's life, because he would have gotten electrocuted by Surge, and that is not a great way to go. Surge starts also doing something really cool that I don't think we had ever previously seen in video games or inside of the comics up until that point, and that's that she starts combining the Wisp powers. It lets her take on this really vibrant rainbow hue that is kind of reminiscent of Hypersonic. I think it looks really good, honestly. And throughout all of this chaos, Sonic tries to get Surge to join his side still. He's extending that olive branch, but Surge just can't accept it. Sonic's attitude absolutely infuriates her as she explains to Sonic that this is beyond her control. Honestly, it's beyond anyone's control, and due to her mental conditioning, she feels like she can never live a normal life while Sonic is still alive. And amidst all of this, there's this just intense power that's surging through her. As these extreme emotions course through her, the dynamo cage just can't take it anymore. It ends up breaking and it releases all the wisps, causing Surge to just collapse in the water as she's effectively defeated. And then Kit comes in, reminding us how incredibly overpowered he can be whenever Surge is hurt. Eggman would attempt to take Surge for himself, but Kit obviously will not let that happen. And with all of this water around, Kit is right in his element. And it's important to note here that Kit isn't acting out of good faith towards Sonic. He's not accepting that olive branch either. He's focused on fulfilling Surge's plan, and he ends up pulling her out of the silo and collapses everything around him as he does so. He's fully intent on entombing everybody below him, which honestly is absolutely terrifying. Shocker to no one though, but in a comic titled Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic does not die, so yeah, he's fine here. Surge and Kit would be absent for a little while. They would hide out inside of the Sigma base and would be surviving mostly on ration packs. Suddenly though, their base would come under assault from none other than Rough and Tumble. These were former associates to Starline, and after dealing with them, Surge would encounter their new boss, Clutch the Opossum. Or is it Possum? I'm never quite sure for that word. He runs a company known as Clean Sweep Inc. It's a company that cleans up areas that had been previously taken over by Eggman. However, Clutch is also kind of shady, and he's got this underground part of things where he ends up selling the scavenged goods back to Eggman for a profit. Sonic and his friends are a bit of a nuisance for his operation, so Clutch proposes a deal. If Surge can help him out, he'll reveal everything that he knows about her and Kit's true origins. And so, Surge and Kit find themselves at Restoration HQ, secretly working for Clutch as they share a meal with Amy. Their cover story is that they've decided to go good, after being introduced to a variety of people, including a very skeptical Sonic that follows them around, and also this nameless orangutan who just keeps showing up in my videos. Like, this is the third time I've talked about him, and people in the comments have told me that he has a name, but I'm gonna be real here. I can't find anything anywhere. It's never said in any of the comics. I tried looking him up, and the most I can get is he's like the mechanic, and that's it. So unless he's like Doctor Who, where he's just the doctor, I don't think this orangutan has a name. But anyways, after this, they end up joining the Diamond Cutters, even though Whisper is like super reluctant for it. And they meet the Diamond Cutters' new member, whose name is Duo. And he has brown eyes, he wears mitts to cover his hands, and it's Mimic, isn't it? Yeah, this is Mimic. We've seen him in other videos. He's a squid guy who can turn himself into other people. And he's working for Clutch now, which means that he's also teamed up with Surge and Kit. After spending some time with the Diamond Cutters, we would get to see a much more casual Surge with her hair down, and honestly, I love this overall look. It's really cool, and it made me think that, like, we've never really seen, like, any hedgehog-like characters, or tenrecs in this case, who have longer hair, and it's a good look. I enjoy this style. Anyway, Surge is informed that she and Kit need to tail Sonic and mess with his gear at the Extreme Gear Extravaganza. And what is that Extreme Gear Extravaganza, you might be wondering? Well, remember Sonic Riders? No? Maybe this little clip here will jog your memory?
Since you all seem so bored, I put together a little extra something to spice things up. I call it the X-World Grand Prix, a tournament to see who's the best of the best with extreme gear.
Honestly, Sonic Riders had some pretty phenomenal animation, even though I really like to laugh about that one clip. And it's something we hadn't really seen in Sonic before. It also had some really fun little unique styles with like the glasses and stuff like that. Now, if you're wondering why I'm bringing it up, it's because this extravaganza is just a callback to exclusively that, which is a lot of fun. Everyone is dressed like they were in Sonic Riders, and Jet the Hawk is back. More importantly, Surge is here, and she's looking absolutely fire. I dig the sunglasses they gave her, and the leather jacket is just such a fun combo. Giving her a motorcycle is really cool, and such an on-brand move that I feel it only works for her and Shadow. With this new setup, Surge sabotages Sonic's gear and it results in his disqualification. Then, an unlikely ally appears to help Sonic. It's Dr. Eggman rocking a purple suit, and yes, remember I told you the enemy of my enemy thing is going to come back again? Well, here it is. It turns out that Eggman isn't too keen on clean sweep ink, and so after watching the opening on the race, he decides that yes, Sonic was sabotaged, and so he's going to lend him a hand to get rid of clean sweep. He grants Sonic some new gear called the, wait for it, I'm not even joking about this name, Eggstream gear, like egg, I love it. With this, Sonic can distract the race while Tails and Amy dig into what's really going on with clean sweep. However, honestly, Surge isn't directly involved in a lot of this, so we're going to focus on her. The next day, Sonic, under disguise, causes some havoc at the races, and just as he was about to make his getaway, gets rammed by Surge on her motorcycle. Although Sonic ends up escaping from this, and Surge doesn't even finish in the top 3, the audience begin to cheer for her and Kit when they cross the finish line. And to their shock, they're hailed as heroes for stopping this mysterious Phantom Rider. For the first time, Surge displays this real genuine beaming sense of pride as she feels like they're heroes now. Surge continues to bask in the limelight of the races. Once again, Sonic the next day is disguised as the Phantom. He makes his appearance, however, this time Mimic ends up yanking off his helmet and reveals his true identity to everyone at the races. After the race, Surge is left really conflicted. The gang who had seen Sonic have made a decision not to let everybody know that he is the Phantom, so they're keeping it quiet, and it raises these suspicions among the Babylon Rogues that there's something crooked going on if Sonic is fighting against what they thought were the good guys. Struggling to find the right words, but seemingly to be in a similar area as the Babylon Rogues, Surge is approached by a little girl who offers nothing but praise to her. This girl sees her just as a pure hero, and she even declares that she wants to grow up and punch people just like Surge. With that simple affirmation, Surge's mind is made up. She and Kit are going to go straight. They're gonna be heroes, and Kit wholeheartedly agrees. He promises to do anything to help Surge find her smile again. And honestly, it's just so cute to see their evolving dynamic because it's changed so much from like this cold distance they had from each other to like a really close friendship. Filled with the newfound pride in being a hero, Surge heads straight into Clutch's office and announces that her decision is to quit. However, Clutch informs her that he could ruin her life in just mere seconds if they decide to leave, and with that, they find themselves between a rock and a hard place. They're kind of forced to continue working for him, and they'll have to fight against Sonic once again. This news sits really heavily on Surge, and she just doesn't take it well. Like, there's some real anger here, and she ends up screaming out in the air. She is tired of being controlled, and she's tired of being told what to do. While she's grappling with this frustration, Kit steps in with another comforting hug just like before, but this time, he brings more than just emotional support. He has a plan that's going to help them escape from Clutch's grasp. At the next race, Sonic arrives inside of his costume, and everyone, including Surge, immediately turns their attention towards him. However, Surge and Kit go to like some extreme lengths to keep the other racers off of Sonic, and it might initially seem like they're protecting him, but things aren't always as they seem. Through a tactic of malicious compliance, Surge rushes at Sonic, and although it appears that she has been defeated, she's cleverly removed his disguise in the process. With that, Sonic's identity as the Phantom Rider has been exposed to the public. Surge has dealt, and so now, everything is open to everyone. This could lead to a significant blow to Clutch, as now Sonic would have to explain why he is doing this to keep his name straight, and that could really hurt Clutch's business, which at the end of the day has just made the situation a whole heck of a lot more complicated. Now, just a quick little sidetrack from Surge as we take a look at Sonic's friends, and things are really heating up between them and Clutch. This is before he even knew what Surge was pulling off, so I mean, things are going to get really bad for him really fast. See, during all of this, Sonic's friends have been breaking into the system, and from the inside, they've been fighting their way towards Clutch in order to try and expose him to the public. And honestly, amidst all of the fighting that's going on between everyone, I think genuinely the most wild part to me is that Clutch just straight up has a gun inside of his cane. It's just something that's always going to shock me whenever I see a gun in Sonic, even though it's becoming more and more frequent. Now, eventually, Charmy would manage to get proof of Clutch's wrongdoings on the big screen presented to everyone at this extreme racing event to see who is the fastest. On top of that, they also get to see Clutch live mention that nobody really cares about a few sick kids or some dead trees, and that gets everybody booing him, which completely destroys his public image and destroys his business. With his reputation ruined, Clutch then sabotages everybody and sends his airship plummeting to the ground, ready to take down everyone with him in a burning blaze of glory. With Clutch out of the picture, Duo/Mimic starts to get a little bit nervous because, that was his employer, and now he's stuck in the middle of the Diamond Cutters, who pretty notoriously hate Mimic. The Diamond Cutters have also noticed how it's a little bit odd that he's been periodically disappearing, and although Mimic has an alibi for now, it definitely won't be long before his cover is blown. And not only that, but it doesn't help that these newfound anti-hero pals are also pretty much ready to take him out now that Clutch is out of the picture. With everybody chasing Sonic, Surge is left with Mimic, and she gives him such a cool line when she tells him that he can either deal with the Diamond Cutters or he can deal with her, and it's his choice. And I just love it. It establishes so well that he's stuck between like a rock and a hard place. And although it's a little bit anticlimactic, I really don't feel like waiting till December to continue this video. And honestly, I feel like we've had a really good transition arc throughout Surge's character, and we've seen her go from what was honestly just a kind of generic evil version of Sonic and slowly flourish into what is her own character, and I think is a really interesting anti-hero that I'm hoping continues to follow down this route. I'm personally really excited to see what the future holds for her. If anything major happens with Surge, you can be sure that I'm going to be covering her again in the future. Now, before we close off, I do just want to give some kind of fun facts. This is one of those things that I already brought up inside of the Starline video, but both Surge and Kid are based off of glitches that Ian Flynn, the head writer for IDW, had faced in the past. The first one being the Ashura glitch, where Sonic was green with this kind of black thing on his head. Scourge was designed with the same color scheme in mind as well inside of the Archie Sonic comics, and it's a lot of fun to see something like that influence characters. However, there are a few things in the comics that I think are particularly more fun to talk about than that. Way early on, Surge ends up saying "Sweet Gaia below," which is obviously a reference to Sonic Unleashed, in which Gaia was a very prominent character. And it's kind of cool to see this because Gaia played a really big role in the end of the Archie Sonic comics, which I've been reading a lot recently for other videos. And it's this interesting link between the two of them, because obviously both comics are going to be linked by the games, but it just feels cool to see some similarity between the two. Furthermore, closer to the end, you may have noticed something with that little girl, and that's that her mom is the conductor's wife from the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. Oh wow, it's like a wild little Easter egg to see there. So I guess it's confirmed that they have a child, and it's fun to see that those characters are still continuing to come through. I really enjoyed the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, and I even have a video on it if you're kind of curious about that. It's a little bit old, but I think it's a lot of fun. Anyways, with that, I have to say I really enjoy Surge's character, if you couldn't tell, and her relationship with Kid is just adorable. Watching them grow as they both deal with their shared trauma is a slow burn that I live here for. And seeing Surge be so much more than just a green and edgy version of Sonic is really refreshing, and it wasn't the direction I thought they were originally going to go with her. When she was first introduced, I couldn't help but feel like she was just going to be the IDW version of Scourge, just like a female version of Scourge. But who would just take a character and make them a gender-swapped version? Maybe even just a slightly different off-color. Surely not me. However, she's been so much more, and with so much more characterization, I can't see her ever going back to just being a generic villain. And honestly, I look forward to seeing her more inside of this anti-hero sort of role in the future. This has been my most topical video I've ever made, as I've covered everything about Surge from her conception up until the latest issue, which came out on the 30th of October of this year. And I'm planning this video to come out in November, so it should be still pretty recent, which is kind of cool. I usually talk about comics that released years ago, so big deviation for me. If you enjoyed this kind of look and you want to see more of it, of course leave a like, comment, and a subscribe. They can really go a long way. If you have anything you want to add, I would love to hear it. And at the end of the day, I can tell you what to do. I just hope that you have a good one.